All right, I see people already popping into our webinar for today. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. It is Change is Hard, how to bring innovation to your district and see results. This is a topic I am very excited to talk to you about today. We are just going to give everybody a moment to settle in. But as always, if you wouldn't mind heading over to the chat while we wait and letting me know who you are. We're going to do a more formal check-in in just a moment, but I always like to know where people are coming from as we get going today. We've already got a good sized group for us. Yeah, feel free to use the chat. It is always our best friend when doing one of these webinars, and I'm excited to get started in just a moment. But yeah, hop over there. Let us know who you are. All right, everybody, as you're moving in, I've said it a few times now, but please let us know who you are by putting your name in the chat. We'll do a more formal check-in in just a moment, but it is always nice to see who I am speaking with. And we will start at 2 past the hour, just to give everybody just a little bit of time to settle in, get some coffee, do whatever you have to do. Mariah, welcome. Let's see, math curriculum. Council Bluffs. Okay. Does that mean is that Iowa? Iowa, good. Okay. I like Iowa. Might be visiting later this summer for personal travel. Very excited for that possibility. So thank you for getting us started in the chat. All right, everybody else, feel free to do so. We're going to do another check-in in just a moment, so you can always save it for then. But welcome to today's oh, we got a Connecticut in the house. We got Arkansas in the house. I work in Arkansas, as we'll talk about it in a little bit. Connecticut, I've worked in Connecticut as well. All right, so let's officially get started. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got a great sized group. And if you've been with us over the past few weeks, one of the things that really make these webinars engaging is the more that you are active in the chat. It gives me someone to bounce ideas off of, and to be able to ask questions is a really great way for me to understand where you want to take this topic. Obviously, I have prepared the talk track, if you will, for today, but knowing where you want to take it really does help me, and I can curate it to meet the needs of the group. But thank you all for checking in. We've got some Wisconsin, we've got Texas in the house, another Arkansas, very exciting. But today's topic is a really interesting one, and it is about change being difficult. And how do we, continue to innovate despite that change being hard? And this is a topic that I have found very interesting over my career, and excited to share with you some thoughts today. But with that said, in case you are new to us, and congratulations for joining us here on this webinar, we've built up a little bit of a community over the past few, but we are Education Elements. We are a K through 12 consultancy group. We work on a bunch of different things for districts, including strategic planning, personalized learning, leadership development, data support. We do a bunch of different things, but one of the things that I wanted to mention that we do today is my favorite part about my job, working with Education Elements, is the thought partnership that I get to have with the districts that I support. So very often we come in contact with a district for a specific need, and then we've developed a good, close working relationship with them. So much to the point where my favorite calls are, "Hey, Nick, can you jump on a call for a second? I've got an idea to run past you." And it's usually the district asking, "Hey, we're thinking about going in this direction, something completely different than the work that we're working on." And they just want somebody to bounce ideas off of, because what they recognize is what we are going to talk about today, which is change is hard. And we often need somebody to just think through things with. And that is my favorite element of my job, is to have those cool, exciting conversations about new ways that we can take learning for our kids. So I just wanted to start with that. That's the work that we do. And it does end up getting pretty personal, and it's personal because it's difficult. The work is hard, as you know, working in education. We have close to 50 partners and consultants that work for our company all across the country. You are with me today. And if you haven't been with me before, my name is Nick Esposito. I've been on the past few webinars and going to continue to do so as we continue talking about implementation of various things. And oh, Ann's in the house. Ann's been with us for the last few weeks. Welcome again. My name is Nick Esposito. I was a teacher for like 10 years in inner city Baltimore and in Philadelphia. I then became very passionate about teacher mental health. So a lot of today's conversation is things that I spoke about while speaking to schools about that particular topic. But obviously it's tailored for a more broad conversation. I currently am working with districts a lot in the state of New York, but I've worked in Arkansas at the state level with micro-credentialing. And I'm working in Minnesota on strategic planning, North Carolina with STEM education. We get to do all sorts of exciting things. And that's where I'm really excited to talk to you about this idea of change being difficult, because we've seen it all in terms of things that school districts are trying to do. So hopefully we can all come together today and get some clarity about things that we can do to make that change not so scary. Okay? So enough of me. Let's talk about you. I know we've already checked in the chat, but now I want to add the question here. So feel free to continue to add your role like you already have. But I'm really interested in this question that's in the red there on the screen, which is, what was a game-changing shift that you made as an educator? And if you weren't a teacher in the classroom, whatever position you currently hold, what was a shift that you made in terms of your strategy, in terms of your mindset, in terms of your approach to your role that really made a difference? Please drop that in the chat, and I'll use some of those ideas as we move forward here today. Love where everybody is coming from today. This is pretty exciting. Yeah, what is a game-changing shift you made as an educator? Kelly gets us started. Empowering students, creating student behaviors to allow them to own their learning. We're going to talk some about personalized learning examples today, Kelly, and that's what I talk about all the time. And involving students in your decision-making process. Very good. I know for me, while I listen with positive intent, meet every person. Thank you, Mr. and Miss Pope. Gathering input to empower, releasing control. That's a big one. I know for me, I like based my teaching right off of TV show teachers, right? Like you wanted to be Mr. Feeney, or one of the countless other like inspirational teachers. And it always seemed that the episodes would like culminate in this big reveal of what the lesson was. And I tried to do that too. And then I realized that meant that I was keeping my students pretty much in the dark for like 85% of the lesson. And then by the time I gave them the right answer, it was time to go home and do their homework and they were lost. So once I realized that I was doing a disservice to them, I just flipped the classroom and suddenly I was like, all right, let me just tell you what I'm going to do and then build up to it. That was a really big game-changing shift, but I needed to live through the pain part of it in order to get there. We've got asking more questions, involving a variety of stakeholders. Using different frameworks in your classroom, getting away from labels. Love this. You guys all have so many great ideas. I'm excited for today's conversation because I'm thinking that it is going to be applicable to all of the things that you have put there in the chat. So let's get started with just kind of letting us know where we're headed today. We're going to answer two guiding questions or essential questions. The first is, and this is the quick one. We're going to get it out of the way. What makes change so challenging? Why is it scary? Why do we resist it? And then specifically, now that we know that it is scary, how do we build our systems, our organizations, our classrooms in a way that they actually don't just resist change, but they actually will gain because of that chaos, that disorder and whatnot, right? For a couple of housekeeping items, if you are liking anything I say, please put a +1. If you, for some reason, really hate everything that I'm saying, yeah, I guess you can put a -1 and I'll feel bad about that later. But if you have anything to say in terms of a question or a thought, please put it in the chat. I see that there is a question and answer like thing here for the broadcast. Just put it in the chat because so I can just have one window open. Very much appreciate that. Someone already just said thank you there, and I really do appreciate that. But just send it over to the chat. I recognize that that was a function last time and would be easier to operate. Okay, we've got everybody ready to go. Good size group today. Very excited for this topic. And now I have a question for you. This is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but have you ever met an educator that was afraid of or resistant to change? Feel free to put in the chat whether it was a yes or a no. And what are they afraid of? What kind of changes are they afraid of? Mariah, Kelly saying countless and many. Yes, we can be that educator. I know I was. I'm speaking mostly about myself with that. Yes, we have a lot of them. Yes, Kevin. Yeah, this is not blaming them or that they're resistant to change. Yeah, that's where we're headed right now. It's why. So we're going to answer that question. Why are they afraid of change? Kelly had kind of hit the nail on the head, right? They're afraid of losing control a little bit. We've all been there, people are saying. Leave the comfort zone, which is so funny because we as educators are trying to move our students out of their comfort zone all of the time. But very often when we're thinking about it as teachers or as leaders or as buildings or districts, we want to stay within our comfort zone as much as we can. So that's what we're going to try to kind of grapple with as we work through today's through today's session. Aaron, yes, creates more work. We're going to talk about that as well. How to be smart about the change that we are asking of our people. Okay. And Lydia, perfect segue to my next thought. So one thing that I try to bring up with a lot of the districts that I work with is let's just have a real conversation for a second about learning anxiety. A lot of people do have fear about change, and it's for every single reason that you just put into the chat. Right, learning anxiety. And by the way, when we send out the slides to this webinar, in the speaker notes of this slide, there are a couple of interesting articles that you can access that talk more in depth about learning anxiety. But for now, this definition I thought was this sentence was very interesting. Learning anxiety comes from being afraid to try something new for these three reasons: for fear that it will be too difficult, that we will look stupid in the attempt, or that we will have to part from habits that worked for us in the past. We all have been there before. I think Kevin said it best. I don't blame teachers for feeling this way, or I don't blame anyone for feeling this way. So that's why when we put our leadership hats on today, we got to make sure that we keep that in mind, empathize with the people that we're asking to change, and work with them to make it not so scary. Right? So what is the type of transformation that we are looking for our teachers to make here, right? As leaders, you may have anxiety about how to implement change, which is totally fine. But as you were getting ready for that change, please ask yourself some of these questions. What anxieties do you have about implementing change? How does your organization typically respond to change? Really understanding both yourself and your organization really does matter when you are setting out on a new path towards something different. So when we're talking about that transformation, to go from that learning anxiety to that growth that we're going to talk about all day today, right? These are some of the mindset shifts in that change arc, also an article that you'll have access to, right? Some of the mindset shifts that we as leaders can help our teachers see. One, if it looks really difficult, how do we show them that it's actually easy, that it's doable? And we're going to have examples of that today. How do we take a look at this is costly, right? It's gonna cost us money. It's gonna cost us energy. It's gonna cost us time. Okay, but instead of thinking about that, how do we think about what it's going to bring us, what it's going to be able to afford us, and how is it going to be so rewarding? And then finally, this feels weird, right? Often it's just I just don't want to step outside of my comfort zone, like so many of you said in the chat. It feels weird. How do we make it normal? And there are certain things that we can definitely do to make those mindset shifts happen, to increase our ability to make that change not so scary, and then therefore success within our implementation. Okay? So that's where we're headed in terms of why it is so scary. But today I wanted to share with you a book that my friend who's in finance suggested for me. He was saying, this is just a really cool book that I'm reading, or an interesting concept. And we're not going to use all of it, but we're going to use a little bit of it today just for framing purposes. He was talking to me about the book, and he was describing that this author, Nassim Taleb, is an economist and a statistician. And specifically, he focuses on problems of randomness, uncertainty. He studies chaos. And as my friend was explaining to me the concept, that second sentence that you see there, I was like, randomness, uncertainty, chaos. Well, that sounds like education to me. That sounds like every single day in a school district. So then I read the book, and while it is a little dry and it's about economics, it is got a lot of great ideas that we can use to help us kind of mitigate the fear of that change, right? So the book Anti-Fragile is a term that he coined because he realized that this term just didn't exist, and we're going to explore it in just a moment. Feel free to put a +1 if you've heard of this concept before. A lot of us have heard the concept. Not a lot of us have actually read the book. But it reveals how some systems, some organizations are able to thrive from shocks to the system, that they're able to thrive through volatility and uncertainty, while others crumble. What makes those two organizations different, and how can we be the first? Right. Feel free to put a +1 in the chat if you have heard this concept. And if you haven't, welcome aboard. I'm really excited to share it with you. We're not going to talk about all of the concepts. Like I said, we're going to focus on just a few. But let's transition now to one final question to get us started. In the chat, please think back to yourself as a first-year teacher. Can you describe yourself, how you were, in one word? I've got mine for sure, but I would like to hear from you. If you were a first-year teacher or an educator or whatever position you're holding now, what was a word that would describe you when you just started? Aaron, thank you. Overworked. Thank you for getting us started there. Kevin, optimistic. We got eager. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chris. Inspired, eager, and exhausted. So a little bit of like the positive and the negative there for sure. What else? How would you describe yourselves in one word as a first-year teacher? Hopeful. We got an optimistic group here today. I'm very excited. Innovative. Thank you, Mariah. I'm interested by the fact that everybody is, not everybody, most of the people have more positive things. I'm going to speak for myself personally, because I felt all of those things, by the way. I was like, wanted to, conquer the world and help every single kid that I could. But once that was like before I showed up, and then like once the first day happened, then I felt, for the sake of this, for the sake of my framing, I'm going to say the word fragile. As a first year teacher, please put a +1 so I know that I'm not the only one. This is how I felt. I took everything personally. If a student misbehaved in my class, it was because they hated me as a human being, right? If they didn't do their homework, it's because they disrespected my class. Not to mention like all of the actual reasons, but that's how I felt. I worked unreasonable hours. Like somebody said in the chat, that was overworked. Aaron, you had said you felt overworked as well. I was working unreasonable hours to make up for what I just couldn't do or didn't know. I was so worried about my administration coming in for an observation that for every period I like kind of peeked outside the door, hoping that they weren't turning the corner headed my way. It was very I was on edge at all times. And every little mistake that I made or disturbance that I encountered really crippled me. And I had a lot of, teacher anxiety my first year, honestly, probably my second year too. I see no +1s in the chat, so I'm guessing I am by myself on this. Thank you, Mariah. There were tears. Yes, thank you for backing me up in the chat. Yes, it is a very emotional thing because it's like unlike other jobs, like it's just so personal. You want to do your best because you want to be a good teacher and you don't want to feel like you're letting kids down and all of it. And while I'm using a first-year teacher as a metaphor here, this is a real metaphor for, or an example of, the organizations, the groups, the teams that we lead, right? Because although I felt that way, as you know, time passes and things improve. And that experience makes things not so bad, right? So as teachers, as like people who are supporting first-year teachers, right? a teacher is feeling overwhelmed. So what are some things that we do, right? And once again, this is a metaphor, right? Or an example, right? We provide more supports. We try to give them a mentor. We offer more training, professional development. We develop more teaming structures to insulate them with teachers who know what's going on. We find more data metrics to help inform their decision making, right? We zero in on all of these things. And to take a step away from the example of the teacher, right? We do that for ourselves and our district and our campuses. I'm going to use the word organization a lot just for the sake of, including everybody. But for that organization, we try to make sure that we put some band-aids all over the place to make ourselves bigger and bigger and bigger so that as volatility happens, we are prepared to defend ourselves against it, right? We like to think of ourselves, triumphantly as a phoenix rising from the ashes, right? That's the kind of the animal that I would think about when coming up as a more of a resilient teacher. But I think what's really important for us to remember is that we have to keep in mind that in order for a phoenix to rise from the ashes, it first must burn. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. As we try to get more robust and we try to use that experience to back ourselves up, right? So every single possible situation that might come and cause us some shock or stress, we have an answer for it because we've got experience. I've been there, I've done that, right? And that's a good thing. But the word that you see in all of these bullet points that kept coming up as I was creating this slide was the word more. We're constantly, adding and adding and adding and adding. And sometimes we take away, but it's a lot of this adding, and we keep getting this bigger and bigger. And we're not going to go into the reason for why this might be an issue. But if you're interested, go visit our webinar from a few weeks ago when we talked about initiative overload and what are some of the downsides to possibly doing that. So since we're trying to think about using this anti-fragile concept, let's remember there are three kinds of organizations that we can build here. So the first one that we talked about just by that teacher example. Oh, and by the way, I didn't end up talking to you about why I have pasta here. The analogy that I like to use for this stage is that I felt like a piece of raw pasta, right? I was extremely rigid, but very flimsy at the same time. And any sort of shock would break me. And I'm going to use, obviously, that's going to come back in just a second. But when we talk about fragile organizations, this is when we are so worried about change that we don't even see the upside of an opportunity, but we are kind of exposed to the potential downside of things not working out. So we have a lot of downside, not a lot of upside. And we're going to talk about what that looks like in just a little bit, because we have that exposure that we don't want. Another, metaphor or analogy that I like to use is when the wind blows, somebody who is fragile is going to just be very afraid, curl up in a ball, and kind of sob to themselves. But as we get more experience, we know, okay, well, the wind's actually not that scary. We can survive it, right? And the organization is able to plan for any possible scenario that might come our way. And our strategy when we are a robust or resilient organization is that we try to resist that volatility. So when the wind blows, we don't cower in fear, but instead we actually try to construct a wall and block the wind. And while that is a good thing, right, moving towards resiliency is obviously a better scenario. What we learn through education is we don't know all of the issues, all of the crazy things that could come our way. And therefore, we can't plan for every single scenario, right? We didn't know that COVID was going to happen, but can we prepare for it? No, we really couldn't, but then we needed to make some moves. So the question is, we need to Nassim Taleb, the author of the book, he needed to think of a new word that didn't actually exist at that point. And he created this idea of anti-fragile, which is the opposite of fragile. In this situation, that we have a lot more to gain than we have to lose. And we're going to talk about how to actually get that done in just a moment, right? Because we actually welcome volatility. And I'm not saying we welcome COVID, but we welcome change. We welcome small disruptions to our ecosystem, because what that does is gives us opportunities to grow as an organization. And that's what I want to focus on here is we're not just worried about resisting it and building a wall, but instead we look at the wind, we see its potential, and we build a windmill. Okay, so hopefully that metaphor is an easy one to understand in terms of our triad that we have here today. Okay, So I use the raw pasta example, and I would say that like pasta has the potential to be anti-fragile, right? By putting the pasta in hot water, it gets its flavor, it gets its structure, and it makes for a more enjoyable meal than if it was raw. So today, how can we be like that pasta and move ourselves into an anti-fragile state? So the 5 strategies that we are going to talk about, and Yana, thank you so much for already getting to where my next question is going to be, is which one of these that I'm about to outline is something that resonates with you. So with that said, we've got 5 that I'm going to talk about today. One is, how do we invest in the right things? By investing in the right things, we can make sure that we are setting our people up for success when change does come. Number 2, how as leaders can we take a look at the horizon and minimize our downside while preserving the upside? Number 3, this is a very tough thing for a lot of people who like control. How do we embrace and create space for randomness? We want randomness to occur. Number 4, like we said in the chat, we want to make time for recovery. Recovery and learning is essential to be an anti-fragile organization. And then finally, you can't do anything without creating authentic buy-in from the people who are responsible for the change. So I'm going to take a break from talking for just a moment, and I would like to hear from you. Out of those 5, and I'll put them back up on the screen in a second, which of those strategies right now resonate with you most? Thank you, Amanda. Investing in the right things, creating buy-in. Got a few for creating buy-in. We'll definitely get there. I like that we've got some diversity in terms of the questions. Kevin, minimizing doubt. Yes, so people are willing to take risks is exactly where we're going, Kevin. Thank you. Invest in the right things, bracing randomness, the divergent thinking, Chris. You guys know exactly where I'm headed with this. Now, like I said, this book is a thick book. It is to be frank, it is a little bit of a dense book, but it has a lot of great just kind of concepts and stories that I was able to mentally apply to education, right? And by doing that, I use it in my work quite a bit when I work with districts, and I'm going to provide you some examples. But one thing that I think would make this webinar even more useful is, as I'm speaking and giving an example of one of these 5, feel free to put your own example in the chat so that everybody can see that it's not just Nick talking. It's I've seen, that you've seen this in real life as well. Okay. So let's talk about investing in the right things. And I've got another question. I like to pose some questions here. And that one is not that one. This is the framework, by the way, before I get to that question. This is the framework, The Art of Implementing Well, that we have been using over the past few webinars. And in the top right corner of all of those 5 strategies that I just outlined for you, you're going to see which ones I think correlate to some of the work that we would do with The Art of Implementing Well. Okay. And I put these slides in here just so that when you get the slides in the follow-up email, you'll have access to this framework. All right, so in the chat, I think this might be the final question of the day. What is better, something old or something new or something old? Feel free to, let's see who wins in the chat. Is it something new or something old? Darn it, Kevin, don't say it depends. That's exactly the right answer. Something old that's tried and true. Thank you, Anna. It depends. Thank you, Kelly. Right? The good thing is there's no real wrong answers here. And the idea is that it is both. And the context matters, as we see. We got both with a few exclamation points, right? Something old and something new, right? For example, if I were to ask you, would you rather have a bright, shiny, new, crisp, juicy apple, or would you like a mealy, mushy, rotten apple, right? You would obviously take the new. If I asked you, which kind of computer would you like? The fast one with all the latest gadgets? Or would you like an old computer that still uses dial-up, right? Obviously, you would choose the new. But then if we think about it from the other perspective, what if we talk about what kind of book should I read or what kind of movie should I watch? And I say, like, what's the best movie of all time? A lot of people will say Casablanca. They'll say The Godfather. People say Citizen Kane, right? And the reason that they say those types of movies is because they are considered classics. And for whatever reason, something about The Godfather, something about Casablanca, they have stood the test of time. There's something about that is universally liked, right? So that's why if you only had one movie to watch, should I watch like the movie that just came out that has no real, track record, or the one that has stood the test of time? And obviously in that case, you would go with the classic. So the answer is it depends. Kevin's talking about Cars in the chat. And now we don't know, right? Because it's all about the context and the situation and your taste as well. But for the sake of our kind of the framing here, I am breaking down each one of these strategies into 3 different parts. One is the role of the leader. Then I'm going to give you like a suggestion to try, and then finally a warning that I have seen in the districts that I work. So one of the concepts that he puts forward in the book is called the Lindy effect. And the Lindy effect is exactly what we just talked about, right? As the life expectancy goes on, right? As long as the life expectancy is high, you want it to be old. But if it's got a short life expectancy, you want it to be new. So if something is, in other words, if something is perishable, then you want the newer of the things. But if it's got like a movie, for example, can live forever, you're probably going to want to go old, because that means that it stood the test of time. So when I apply this to education, right, when we're thinking about investing in new technologies, strategies, or initiatives, we can improve our ROI by just keeping in mind where on this little graphic here does this new investment lie, right? So the way that I think about it is just asking ourselves a simple question: what opportunities does this new initiative afford us? Is this a tried and true strategy that we should invest our effort in? Okay, the classic, if you will. That's great. Maybe invest in those. Or is this a new technology, or is it a passing fad? Does this new technology, is it just like a fancy version of what we used to do, or is it do something that actually pushes what education looks like in our classrooms in our district? The warning that I have seen in districts is that not all solutions are right? And not all of the right solutions are right for us. So just making sure that you understand what your district needs is very important. The gain, right? So the whole point of these 5 things is, how do we gain from change? How do we gain from disorder? And that this gain is particularly increasing our ROI. So let me give an example really quickly. I work a lot with personalized learning. It is one of the things that we really care about here at Education Elements. That graphic there on the left-hand side is the core 4. And one of the first things that I talk about with districts when we start our implementation is we need to get a communication campaign out about what personalized learning is, because very often people think of it as this passing fad. They think of it as this thing that we have to do. And when I walk into classrooms, the teachers all nervously say, "Oh man, if only you had come here 10 minutes from now, you'd have seen me personalized learning." And I'm like, no, that you've missed the point of what personalized learning is. It's not a what, it's not a thing that we do, it's a way that we do it, right? It's at its core, we're increasing student ownership, we're increasing student choice, using data to target flexible pathways for our kids to take and to empower them in the classroom, right? So the way that we can create it, not as a what, but actually as the how of the district, that is an investment. That is like our Godfather strategy that we can then use as a lens to take a look at every other what, any other investment that we want to move forward. It is filtered through the how of personalized learning, right? So if a new app or a new technology platform or a new strategy comes, and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, is this one of those investments that we should be making or not? And we ask ourselves, does it fit with our why or our how of personalized learning? If the answer is no, then save yourself that initiative overload and don't do it, right? We only have so many dollars, so many minutes, so much energy that we can use, right? So by doing that, it really does help us out. By having this alignment, and that's where we come with our work with resource prioritization. By having this alignment, when you do try something new, you don't need to spend as much time getting your teachers to buy into the new thing, because they already understand, okay, this is our why and this is how it connects, right? That's the only argument you need to make, and not something more difficult, right? Which is what we deal with a lot when teachers are pushed outside of that comfort zone. So that's the first one that we have here. Now let's assume that we've got our strategy and we're ready to move forward. Now, our job as leaders is, as much as we can, to minimize our downside, right? That doesn't mean that we want to eliminate all mistakes, as you can see there in the warning. But we want to make sure that we by limiting downside, or the way that we can do that. Sorry, I got tripped up with my sentence there, right? What we need to do in order to do that, we need to leverage our negative knowledge. Now, I don't mean pessimistic knowledge, but what that means is when you're starting a new initiative, the big hint that I can tell you is actually, so studies show that we are actually more accurate at predicting what doesn't work than what does work. So this actually works on a few different levels. We use that experience that we have, we can fill in some of those potholes that we might run into by just avoiding them as we move forward. You've done implementation with your staffs in the past. How do we not step in those same things? The other reason that this really works is because it preserves that upside and requires there to be authentic collaboration and innovation. Think about it this way. If as a leader, you are just protecting your staff from making big mistakes, they're allowed and encouraged to make small ones. Your job is to protect them from making big mistakes. But by doing this, you are not the leader out front telling them, this is the way that we're going to do it. No, you're actually telling them, we're not doing it this way. How you think we should do it. And because of that, it makes them invested in the plan. So these first two ideas is about investing the people that are working on the project. So it's not just the leader pushing for it, it's the entire team. And that's when you get a lot more wind in your sails. Now, the big warning that I have for you is you very often as leaders try to take control and say like, okay, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we're not going to do this. As they're doing that, they're taking so much control that what they're doing unknowingly is actually ironing out the peaks as well. And what we're doing by that is not giving our teachers any room for creativity. And without creativity, it's just going to become a compliance-driven thing, and then it's not going to go where you want it to go. I've seen this almost every single place we do. So by doing this, it is not just the leader that has the knowledge, it is the entire institution. So we are building our gain here by minimizing the downside is we are building that institutional knowledge, which is needed both now and for always. I'm going to take a breath for just a second. How do those first two work for you, or how have you seen that work in your experience? I'll take a quick second. It is not always easy to do this, but having moments, whether it be with your leadership team or with the people who are responsible for implementation, actually talking, do a pre-mortem of your project, and then think about, all right, where can this go wrong? Where has it gone wrong in the past? And by eliminating those, they can feel comfortable moving forward and innovating and collaborating with one another, which is obviously what we need in order to grow as an organization. Thank you, Yana. Seen more compliance-driven initiative versus actually involving and investing with those who are actually charged to comply. Yes, absolutely. We see this all of the time, and we're going to continue to talk about that as we move forward. I hope that central, like what you just mentioned, is kind of the central theme that ties all of these five together is how do we invest the entire organization? And by doing that, we become more anti-fragile. Chris says it resonates big time. Shared leadership essential. Goes back to Dan Pink's. Yes, love that. The autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Love that. All of those concepts as well. Thank you for calling that out. Everyone go check that one out as well. All right. Here's an example that I have. This is some of my work that I've done in Arkansas, or like just a strategy that I suggest. This also works for personalized learning. Honestly, any sort of implementation. I've never seen teachers who feel like super overwhelmed kind of take a big exhale when you just tell them like, look, we are looking for 1% growth here, because 1% growth is actually exponential growth. 1% today is not as much as 1% tomorrow. And if we can help our teachers take those little steps, right? We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. We're putting our eggs in 12 different baskets, and it really does help them build momentum as a group. So one of the reasons that, with the state of Arkansas and others, I have really become passionate about micro-credentials as a professional learning offering. And if you've tried it out, please put so in the chat. If you would like a webinar on micro-credentials, I am noodling with the idea of doing one, because it is something that seems like it's building steam, but people don't know exactly what it is. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm very passionate about it, but essentially what a micro-credential does is it works in tandem with traditional professional learning, but instead of investing in these big professional learning experiences in which, as a teacher, you're not sure whether, or as a leader, you're not sure whether or not the teacher actually kind of retained any of the information. What a micro-credential does is it takes that professional learning and it minimizes it down into one discernible skill. And the teacher can only receive the micro-credential if they demonstrate that learning. So it is actually, the ROI on micro-credentials is really big. It takes more effort from the teacher, but it shows that the PD actually really works. But by doing that, a teacher is able to build momentum. It's a small, low-stakes situation, and I've seen that really work in school districts as something that really minimizes the downside within the organization. Okay, so that's that one. Once again, I told the education elements team before I started this webinar, like I could talk about this for all these concepts for 8 hours. So I'm trying to keep it brief, but so forgive me. But I always find this conversation a lot of fun. So number 3, and this is probably the most unsettling for people who like control, and I feel like a lot of educators and leaders like having control, but randomness is very important for innovation, for that spark energy that we need for that anti-fragile organization to help it grow when we, experience discomfort and volatility and whatnot. So our role as a leader is to intentionally plan for that randomness. We got to create space for collaboration to happen, and we need to do that by writing loose plans, not prescriptive, really structured ones. And that's really scary to say. Studies show, and I'll actually find the article and attach it here, but what studies show is that we are better at looking back on success. So if you have a successful experience, you can look back, and I bet you could tell everything that you did right? I worked really hard. I did this, I did that, I did this, right? But if you look back on an unsuccessful experience, you probably can say, well, we didn't collaborate right. We invested in the wrong thing. We did this. But you also probably are able to say, well, we also got really unlucky, right? The timing wasn't right. We ran out of money for this grant. We did this and we did that. But we don't think of that for success. We very often, studies show that we are not good at discerning where did randomness, where did luck come into play when it came to our successful implementation of something. So a couple of things are kind of just fact, right? We know that randomness is going to happen. And we also know that we can't predict what it's going to be. But we also kind of know that it's there. Like we know that we need random things to happen on our side, like luck to happen, in order for us to be successful. So our job as leaders is to create that space for that type of work to happen. And like I said, your job is to clearly communicate the initiative's fixed and loose guardrails. I'm going to show you an example in just a moment. This ensures that people feel empowered to use the implementation of the initiative to address the needs of their reality, right? It's not just, we're doing this for compliance reasons, like was said in the chat. It is because I need to make better experience for my kids in my classroom, right? And this also needs an idea of like differentiation from our for our teachers. So the example that I want to kind of showcase this is I am working with personalized learning. And when I say personalized learning, I really mean any sort of educational initiative, curriculum initiative that you might be working on. It just happens to be the one I'm working on right now. But in personalized learning implementation at Education Elements, we often have the year culminate in a capstone or prototype process. So what that means is we will spend professional development hours throughout the year training teachers up, sharing what our core 4 of personalized learning, the framework, if you will, like what that is. And then what we do is eventually transition away from the theory and say, okay, now what does the data say in your classroom? Where should you take this? Like what's a problem that you are currently dealing with your students, or what do your students really need right now? And what about personalized learning can help solve for that? By having the fixed guardrails of the framework, but loose guardrails of, hey, let us know what you need to do in your room. What that does is it puts the ownership on the teacher. And by doing that, the teacher is able to say, well, in my classroom, my students need, or I need, and that invests them, right? They get to try it. And then as a district, what you get to see is, wow, we're trying this one personalized learning initiative, but in classroom A, it looks different than classroom B, and it looks different than classroom C. That's exactly the point. We want teachers to be able to take something that we want them to do and then run with it in one direction. It really does help us build momentum. It infuses that sense of innovation, right? Imagine if you just told them, this is what personalized learning is, this is what we want it to look like, go do it. It's very compliance heavy, and teachers are going to be not super jacked up to do it. And that's not what we want if we want to build momentum into the classroom. Oh, Chris, totally. And then it demonstrates trust, right? Like that's why we're about to get there where I'm talking about that. Like when you get especially those early teachers who are working on an initiative, if you can like help empower them as almost leaders of this work, you guys are, the first pioneers on the Oregon Trail. Like let us know what it's like to actually implement this. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Chris. You baited me into to getting ahead of myself. But yeah, very, very true in terms of establishing trust with embracing randomness. Okay. Now, a lot of people said, make time for recovery here. Like a weightlifter, when you work out, you need to stretch, you need to rest, with the hope that your muscles will then go from being kind of hurt to then build bigger to accommodate the stress that they had just experienced. And what our job as leaders is to, I have one client who always says this, and I steal it any chance I get. And the idea is that support must precede accountability, right? Before we hold teachers' feet to the fire, we need to provide them with the support that they need in order to feel like they can do that innovation that we are asking them to do. So by creating space for people to process the realities of implementation, to talk about what's not working, to talk about what is working, to talk about how my implementation is different than your implementation, we get to do that. What we don't want is to miss any learning opportunities. And by creating space for recovery, it is an anti-fragile idea because we are refusing to do that. When we think of fragile organizations, they don't want to learn, right? Resilient, robust organizations, they want to learn, but they learn from their experience, their academic knowledge, the experience that they've built over time. The difference really between that resilient organization and the anti-fragile one is the anti-fragile one looks at every opportunity as a learning moment. But you can't do that if you don't take the time to do it, right? So making sure you carve out some time is very important. In that same district I was just referencing, one thing, so we started off this new personalized learning initiative, and during that we empowered the school leaders to select about 6 to 8 teachers to pilot the program this year, to develop a proof of concept, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But all of the principals took a different strategy to build their teams. One said, okay, I've got this existing, these couple of groups. I've got this strong math group and I've got this strong social studies group. Those 6 teachers, that's going to be my team. Another teacher was brand new to the building and didn't want to ruffle too many feathers. So they were like, well, I just want the eager beavers, the people who are really pumped up to do this work. And they just got kind of a mix, trying to think of the word, just a random mix of teachers involved on the team. Now, so that there was a good and bad for both of those. In the first situation, what was great was the teacher purposely picked groups of content matter experts so that when they have their existing PLC time, they can devote some of that existing time. So it's not extra work for teachers, like somebody said in the chat. And instead, we're just changing the way that we use that time to include personalized learning strategies. Now, the other group had a great opportunity because they had so many different types of teachers. They got a proof of concept that was all over the map. So it's like, whether it would be art or math or social studies, you have all sorts of teachers showing that personalized learning can work. The downside to that was that there wasn't a common meeting time for all of those teachers. So the principal said, well, in order for them to really succeed here, I need to give them some time to collaborate and reflect and recover with one another. So they moved things around, was able to get some coverage for a day. They sat together and they really rolled up their sleeves and talked about what personalized learning looked like in the classroom. Both situations worked, but it took some strategizing. My point is we need to find creative ways to create that space for teachers to be able to recover through that implementation. Okay. And finally, we need to create buy-in. And I think this was the most popular one that came when I asked you, like, which one of these resonates with you the most? We need to develop a vision as leaders for what success looks like for this initiative. The vision doesn't just include the end of the road, but the road itself. And I've seen mistakes in some districts where they will try to go we're just going to hit every single teacher all at once. And they're going to like it, right? But the reality is we've got teachers who need all different things. And some of them are really excited to jump in. Some of them are not. And when we run into some of those like negative Nellies, that ends up kind of getting being a speed bump that we didn't need to actually step in, right? So I would check out this concept of the law of diffusion of innovation. I found the law of diffusion of innovation through Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, and his TED Talk, plus one if you've seen that one. That's a very famous one. But essentially, the idea of it is that if we can get to about 16 or 17% of like the market, then it becomes a successful initiative. So one of the strategies that I've started to use in districts when implementing anything, I go to the district and I say, okay, who are your most dynamic teachers who are either very eager to do the work, who are all about innovation, they are connectors so that they will be able to like evangelize the initiative for others, right? And we spend the first year just working with them. And sometimes the district might say like, but that's not enough of the market. Like, I feel like we're not doing enough. I'm like, this is the slow burn here. If we can get the 2.5% early on, what that does is it gives us a proof of concept that we can then show to those early adopters, those 13.5% people, maybe in the second half of year one or start of year two. We get them involved now. And now suddenly we've got a lot of teachers. That's like 16, 17% of a district is actually a decent amount of teachers typically. And once we get to that point, then all we need is to start showing how it like actually successfully works in our district, and then the majority comes, because a lot of the majority, they're down to try new things. They just need someone else to walk through the door first. And if we ask everybody to walk through the door at the same time, there's a lot of hesitation and trepidation, and we don't necessarily want that. So slow burning it really helps. It builds momentum. It builds an opportunity for you to reflect and recover. It gives you an opportunity to minimize that downside. And most importantly, it really gets you some leaders that is not just the quote unquote leader in the building. This also provides you an opportunity to personalize professional learning as well. And it's all about the way that we communicate it. So this has become one of the more successful like micro strategies that I have seen, is just slow burning initiatives in pockets of your buildings and your districts where you know it's going to work. And then we'll like, because the laggards are always going to be laggards. So you can't do anything about that sometimes. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and I want to turn it over to you. Which of these strategies are the most relevant to a problem you are currently trying to solve in your district building or classroom? Which one of these is the most relevant to something you're working on right now? I'm just mostly curious as to what are some of these changes. I do have a question, by the way, while we wait for people to go in the chat. This is a good one. How do you account for turnover when it comes to creating buy-in? So using that law of diffusion of innovation, I think about that all of the time in terms of right? Like, so if I'm doing personalized learning implementation, let's say it takes 3 years to do a full rollout across the whole district, right? By the time we actually do that, there's a good chance that a third to a half of our teachers are gone, right? That's kind of crazy. So if that's the case, how do we so what we do then is as a district team, we try to make sure that we are building sustainability plans. And that's usually what I start with them in year 2. Okay, now that we've got our legs under us, how do we then build some of these anti-fragile strategies? And one of them is like personalized learning is something we get in right away during onboarding. This is just like, this is the district's way of learning, just like we talked about up at the very front. And I mean, if you're a new teacher, then you're going to be on team whatever I'm hoping whatever I want, not on team naysayer. And trying to get them right away is pretty important, and actually maybe even a benefit of the turnover. Yes, embracing randomness. Time is a huge issue for campus leaders, for sure, Lydia. Allowing randomness by ensuring agency. 100%, Chris. Like, every different teacher brings something to the table. So thinking that we're going to give them all the same PD is kind of maddening. That's why I love micro-credentials so much. And maybe we'll end up doing a webinar on that where we can talk about it more. But the idea that people can kind of choose their path, choose their way that they can really impact their campus is a big win always. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here with me today. We have a few things to close out. Oh, Yana says, like our students require differentiation of instruction. Yes, exactly. You got it. A couple of things. One is, I hope you walk away from today's webinar with just a few things that you can then communicate to others. Like, one is change is, it's like the title of our webinar today is, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Change is hard. We know that. Part of change is randomness. So instead of fighting it, let's use it to our advantage to promote innovation and collaboration. And sometimes change are changes that we seek out, and sometimes it is change that is thrust upon us. But if we can become an anti-fragile organization or a community, we aren't trying to block it from happening, but we have prepared ourselves so that when it does happen, we're ready to take advantage of the moment, right? There are a couple types of changes, right? Like, we fight the fights we can win, but we also need to fight the fights that are worth fighting. And I think being an anti-fragile organization helps you win more of those fights than lose them. So I really appreciate you all being here today. Thank you for letting me talk about a topic that I'm very into. And if you ever would like to continue this conversation and hear the 8-hour version of me ranting and raving, then please reach out to me via email. And I'll give you my email in just a second. But this is our slide of just like some of the things that we work on here at Education Element. So when we're talking about all of these strategies can be applied to all of these buckets that you see here on the screen. Personalized and blended learning, school transformation, instruction or curriculum strategy, strat planning, leadership development. That's got this all over it. I'm going to be doing an anti-fragile, a little bit of a talk at an event in person in a month or so. And then we also do a lot of survey work, which helps us inform those downsides that we were talking about a little bit earlier. All right. Once again, please join us next time. The next time will be leading. What day is today? Next one will be leading change in education: how responsive leadership and teamwork transform schools. That'll be next Tuesday, April 16th. That's at 11 a.m. Then the one after that will be unifying a divided community: strategies for community engagement. During that one, I've got an awesome co-facilitator coming that I'm very excited for you to meet her. Please continue to join the community. I've really enjoyed all of the people that continue to show up during our time. To sign up for those upcoming webinars, please take a picture of that QR code and do so right now. Otherwise, please send me an email. I love conversing with you and continuing this conversation. But with that said, thank you all for being here today. I'm getting out of here with 1 minute to spare. Thank you all for great participation and have a great day.